my next question is, and it's also based on my personal experience. So as you know, I've studied in the US for 2 years and did my master's there. And, the experience of being at the university, if I compare to Germany, was completely different. So in the US, first of all, you have, it seems like an endless number of subjects that you can study. So literally, like there are hundreds of subjects. And this is something that I feel like, certain subjects, I didn't even know what they were, and they were not offered in Germany. So this was one part of the experience where I felt like, if you're passionate about something, or if you want to find something that really suits you, you can find it in the US, because there will be a university that has, a course or a course of studies about that. So that was one aspect that I found interesting. Something else that I found very interesting is that how you were treated as a student, actually, because that was kind of, very surprising. It was kind of surprising, because and from the experience in Germany, it's like you're a lot on your own. So, if you have questions, yes, you have professors, and, but there isn't, I didn't feel that there's a culture of trying to help you to get from, A to B. It's more like, you're here now, so, figure it out on your own. And I also felt like even often the people who are there to help you, you always felt like you were bothering them. And then I had this experience in the US where you basically supported on all levels. And also I always felt, and this was the big difference, I guess, that people or staff in the US at universities, you felt, or at least it felt like, they really wanted to help you to get better. And they were, if you needed more time, they didn't say, oh, my office hours from 10 to 11. If you showed up at 5 past 11, they closed the door or something, which, happens in Germany, for example. But they were much more willing to dedicate time, and even more time if you needed to it. And like, not only the professors, but in general, the staff in general, or the whole atmosphere was different. And it felt like, they were really trying to help you and things. And I was wondering, do you have any idea where that comes from, or this like difference in experience?
Well, I think to your first question about the courses that are offered, that's a part of the university system here in the United States. Is there's a wide variety of courses that a student has the access to, because just because you're going to study one subject doesn't mean you're not interested in another subject or have an interest in other subjects. And so you have the opportunity to take courses in something outside of what your course of study is, so that, again, when you graduate, you become to society. For example, when I was in university, I took a course on African history. My major in university was exercise science, but I took an elective in African history because I was interested in the continent of Africa and African history. And for me, it actually was a kind of a precursor to something that would happen later in my life, where I would join the Peace Corps, and I would go to Bulgaria and serve for 3 years in the Peace Corps. I found out about the Peace Corps in this African history course, right? So the point is, schools offer these variety of courses so that students can get a very broad education, not necessarily specifically in what they're studying, but things that maybe they're just interested in, because that's going to add value, hopefully add value to that student's life.
Before you answer the second part, that's interesting as well from my perspective, because that is actually what doesn't happen in Germany, because you're very limited. And what you said, for example, to study like exercise science, I'm pretty sure we have that somewhere, but I think it's more compartmentalized somehow. And I don't think you could do a course in like, we probably don't have African history or something, but we might have something else. But universities or the educational system perceives it as, oh no, this doesn't go together, because if you want to study something about exercise science, or if you that it doesn't work. And it's the same, which is interesting to me. For example, I studied to become a teacher at secondary schools, and you cannot study certain combinations of subjects. To be honest, I don't really know the reasoning behind that. For example, you can study 2 foreign languages. So you could study English and French, but you cannot combine. I mean, I don't know if this is still true now, but I couldn't combine. So I wanted to study geography. And then there was a limited number of subjects that I could actually combine. So I decided then to study English and geography. I could have done English and French, but for example, I couldn't study English and math, for example, or I couldn't study physics and I think biology, or and so it's kind of you're limited. And this is also like my experience in the US, that this is not the case in the US, and that might be interesting to know as well from the perspective of someone like going to university in Germany. And I'm also thinking that this again might have something to do with this idea, or this kind of different concept that Americans have about education, that they look at it like you want to have a well-rounded person, and one person is not only interested in one specific thing, and doing something else doesn't mean that it takes away from the one thing that you're studying. For example, what you just said yourself. So this course in African history actually led you on a different path because you joined the Peace Corps later on, which is something that this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't done that. This is kind of interesting. I mean, maybe you can tell the listeners because I don't think in Germany we are all really fully aware of what is the Peace Corps. Maybe you can just give a brief explanation of what that is.
So very briefly, the Peace Corps is a government agency that sends Americans to developing countries with 3 goals in mind. The 3 goals are to educate people of the other country, of Americans, to educate Americans of the people in the country where you served, and they also do some kind of technical training in the country. So it's an organization, but more broadly, it's a program that is about cultural and technical knowledge exchange in developing countries.
Interesting. I mean, we might have this too in Germany. I'm not so familiar with these kind of programs. Like I said, that's why I can also not comment on it. But it's interesting, and it's basically that's the point that that was interesting to me, that this seems that this idea of this well-rounded individual is more important, or is a different understanding of how what makes a human being, basically, I think. And I mean, we also in this podcast about secondary schools, you could already see these differences in, if you looked at the German the German secondary school system and the US secondary school system. So that was interesting to me from this perspective as well.
Yeah, well, a big part of that process is what you mentioned before about the access to professors and the relationship you have with your professors, because in the US system, it's encouraged to have a relationship with your professor, so that you can succeed, and that you can get the education that you're paying for, because remember, it's not cheap, right? And so it's encouraged that you build a relationship with your professors. Now the thing is, the larger the university, the more difficult it is, right, to build a relationship with the professor. In the US system, probably is similar in Germany as well, we have, or professors have assistants. So usually it's a grad student or other students who assist the professor, and they become like a liaison to the professor, and you build relationships with those assistants. But as you go to a larger school, it's difficult to have a direct kind of relationship, with the professors, but it's still encouraged, and professors still have office hours. Many of them make themselves available outside of their office hours, to help students, to of course, with the goal of enriching their experience, right, and their education at the school.
Do you think this is so? Is this because you mentioned like the money that comes into play, right? This idea, so because you're paying for university, so if I pay $60,000 for 4 years of studies, I want something in return. And for example, in Germany, you don't pay, so in a way, why would the professor care how good you feel about your experience, because you are not paying him in a way? Do you know what I mean? Do you think this plays a part? Is this the is this the main thing, or do you really think there's a cultural difference as well?
I think it probably plays a factor in it, right? I mean, I don't know what the salary is of a professor in Germany compared to the United States, but in general, tenured professors. So in the US, we have different types of professors, right? We have professors who are tenured, meaning that they are kind of like permanent professors there at the school. Associate professors or visiting professors who are just there to teach a course, and for 1 semester or 1 year, and and then maybe they'll leave and go somewhere else, and so they're not a permanent fixture at the university. So I don't know what the salary difference is between the US and Germany, but in general, tenured professors make a very, very nice salary, and well, it's because we pay for it, right? I mean, we pay a large sum of money to go to the school, and I think when you do, there's always something about when you pay for something, you expect for something in return, more so than if you don't have to pay for it, right? So if something is given to you for free, I think from a psychological standpoint, you may, expect less from that. So that may have something to do with it culturally, that in the United States, we pay a large sum to go to school. And so therefore we expect, a lot in return for that, that money.
Okay. I was just looking online about, and it seems like, so professors start with like 4,000, depending on the state, 4,500 euros per month to some states around 5,000. So let's say more than 4,500 if you're like I think if you're a full professor. And then if you have I guess if you have a longer tenure, then you make more than 6,000 or 7,000 even, depending on the state where you teach. So I don't know how this compares to the US. Do you know how much a professor makes? I mean, it also depends on the university, right? Because
exactly. Yeah, it depends on the university. I think it depends on also with the tenure, right? I mean, tenure isn't just, a ceremonious kind of thing, right? I mean, there's an expectation that a tenured professor, makes research or contributes towards peer review studies and articles. And, there's an expectation that they bring some notoriety back to the university through their work, right? And because of that, they're compensated very nicely for that, that kind of work.
Interesting. I have another question that is something that's maybe, I mean, probably we also Germans are aware of this through films and I mean, general knowledge anyway, but that in the US you have you have a couple of, I don't know how I would call them, maybe elite universities, like, like the Ivy League universities, as they are called. So, like, can you name all of them? Is this something like that you would would the average American, would they know these kind of top universities by name?
So in general, the Ivy League title for these schools is well known. So if you say I went to an Ivy League school, in general, the American populace would know what you're talking about. Now, would they be able to name all of the schools? Maybe not. I mean, we know the most popular ones, right? Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, I believe Brown University. So these schools are, have name recognition. But there are also other elite schools as well. For example, Stanford University. Stanford is on the West Coast. MIT, right? These schools are considered, the elite universities, not only in the United States, but arguably in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at some rankings, some international rankings, and I think these, like what you mentioned, these three, I guess maybe, most prestigious one, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, they're always amongst the top 5 or something universities in the world or something. So that's interesting. And I also checked before doing this podcast with you, I checked what the tuition fees are for these universities, and basically for these Ivy League universities, it ranges from $52,000 per year to $62,000 per year. And this leads me to the next question of who can actually afford to study there, and how are these universities perceived in American culture? Are people, do they look down on people who study at these prestigious universities, or is it how is that basically?
Well, so to answer that question, in general, the Ivy League schools are looked at very highly, right? So if you say that you graduated, from an Ivy League school, the perception is that you are well educated, that you are the best of the best that America has to offer, especially in certain fields of study like law, like medicine, right? I mean, I don't know the exact number, but I believe almost all of the U.S. presidents have gone to an Ivy League school at some point in their educational career, right? It's going to an Ivy League school is like a stepping stone or a step ladder to the upper echelons of society. So they're looked at very highly. Now, how do people afford to go there is the other question. I think in general, first of all, because they're elite schools, you have to have the credentials in order to be able to get in, right? So you have to have very high grades in high school. You have to have very high test scores, in addition to all of those other things we talked about as far as extracurricular activities, because these Ivy League schools recognize that their reputation really is affected by the type of students that they accept, into their schools. So they're trying to accept the best of the best. Now, in general, the students, from what I understand, and from what I've read, the students who don't necessarily have the financial means to go to these schools, but they have their credentials, these schools make exceptions, or they create a pathway for these students to be able to go there. Many of these schools have huge endowments, right? Endowments in the sense that people are donating millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to these schools every year, and these schools try to use a lot of this money to to bring in students who don't necessarily have the economic means to be able to go there, but like I said, they have their credentials. So many times these students are given scholarships or some type of financial aid to be able to attend these elite schools, even though they don't come from a family of wealth and of means, because you have to come from a family of wealth to be able to afford 50, 60,
Mhm.
$70,000. So in general, yeah, I mean, don't necessarily come from wealthy families, but have the exceptional credentials. The schools, create opportunities for them through scholarships and other financial aid, means.
I mean, what you've just mentioned is interesting, and I checked this again now. What you mentioned is this aspect of an endowment, and I checked, and just for the listeners and the viewers to imagine what this means if you don't know. So, Harvard University endowment is valued at for almost 41 billion US dollars, which kind of, just to make everyone aware of the size or the proportions of the wealth or the money that is actually available, for these things, I guess.
Well, and it's also good for the university as well, right? Because it's a public image issue as well if they're only accepting very wealthy students and not students from more humble backgrounds, right? And so the schools want to try to accept these students in, because for them it's a good public relations thing to run on, that we're accepting all students. It doesn't matter where you come from. If you have the credentials, we're going to make sure you come to our school. So for them, they have an incentive, right, to try to get these students into their school.
One of the last questions to kind of, conclude this topic about tertiary education, and this ties into what we've just talked about already, that, studying at university is very expensive. And maybe this is also like, something that maybe you can answer personally as well. But so is it actually, does it make sense in the US at the moment, or in the in this decade, to actually go to university? Do you actually get value from this? Does university, is it still a factor that gets you a better job, or does it also depend on which university you have your degree from? Because I can imagine, for example, that if you have a degree from Harvard, you don't really have to look very long for a job. I mean, I live in England now, so I know from I taught at a private school, and I know some students who then went to Oxford or Cambridge, and they told me that basically finding a job afterwards, it's not that difficult, simply because they of the connections they make there, of course, but also because of the name of the university. And I'm wondering, so is there still a lot of value to a college degree, and also from your perspective of having done it, is this something that also, like now at the moment with the situation that we have, like with COVID, like that basically you cannot go in person to a university anymore, but I think you still have to pay the fees. So how do you think, what is your personal opinion maybe even about this this aspect?
Well, I think in general, the value of a college education has been watered down, or has been decreased over time, just because of the fact that so many people are going to college and university and graduating with a college education, that now it's almost an expectation that you have a bachelor's degree in order to get a job. I mean, I think before long, even, working at McDonald's, you're going to have a bachelor's degree, just because that's the trend, right? That's the way we're moving as a society, because so many people are getting an education. So in our previous episode, we talked about how this generation is the most educated generation in world history. And a big part of that is because students are going and getting a college and university education. And so because of that, there has been a expectation that you have at least a bachelor's degree in order to be able to, to get an entry level job in the United States. And so there is a difference, though, however, between having a degree and having an education, because just because you have a degree, does that mean you're now prepared to go in and perform a job? So that begs the question, what's more valuable, right? Or what's of more value to finish high school and to go directly into the workforce and get experience, valuable work experience? Or is it more valuable to go to university and get an education and then come out and start that work experience? My personal opinion is, whenever you go to apply for a job, what's one of the first things they ask you is, what is your experience? Do you have at least 5 years of experience in this or that, field? And so I think there is value in both work experience as well as going to university and getting an education straight out of high school. I think it depends on the field of study that you're going into. I think there's a lot of professions in American society that is undervalued. Plumbers, electrician, mechanics, right? These people that keep the economy going, right? I mean, in general, we don't think of them as, with a high status in society, but they provide a valuable, resource to us as a society. We place more value on doctors and of lawyers and of scientists and these kind of degrees. And so you can have a very successful and very stable career and life in these other, fields of study. I think we would call them trades or trades rather, trades being, mechanics, plumbers, electricians, mechanics, those kind of things. I think in Germany, you have special schools that you go to in order to train for these. And in the US, we do, but to a lesser degree than you have in Germany, because in the US, students are kind of funneled into that university educational path.